Welcome back to Live Weather Impact. I'm meteorologist Brittany Van Voorhees. Let's get right to it. We're keeping folks weather alert today, partially because of the heat and humidity, allowing for heat index values above 100 degrees. However, when you combine the heat and humidity, depending on where you live, especially just miles away from the city center, it can feel a lot hotter than your neighbor just a few blocks away. Why is that? Our Destiny Richards introduces us to the urban heat island effect and how that impacts folks here in Charlotte.
When you're standing in the sun, it can feel unbearable, but just a few steps under the shade of a large tree and you feel the difference. I spoke with a couple of experts about why certain parts of Charlotte feel hotter than others, and it all comes down to trees, pavement, and how our city holds on to heat. As Charlotte swelters under a summer heat wave, the best way to stay cool all comes down to science. We met up with Trees Charlotte Program Director Kristen Riley at Freedom Park, where the difference between the sun and shade couldn't be ignored.
As we're doing this interview, I would much rather be under the shade of this willow oak tree than being in the middle of the basketball court.
She says tree-dense cities like Charlotte can be up to 20 degrees cooler than those with fewer trees. That's thanks in part to transpiration, a process where leaves release water vapor, which helps lower surrounding air temperatures.
We here in Charlotte think of that as humidity, and that seems to be a bad thing, but that's actually helping cool down the environment too.
But when the sun sets, a new challenge begins. Charlotte becomes what experts call an urban heat island, and it hits hardest in the city center.
When the sun goes down, the rural areas start to quickly cool down, whereas the urban core has stored all that heat and energy from the sun throughout the day, and then it starts re-releasing it to the air in the overnight hours.
Matthew Easton is a UNC Charlotte associate professor who's also a part of Charlotte Heat Mappers, a volunteer group that tracked this last July. Using mounted sensors on cars, they recorded temperatures as they drove through the city at different times of the day. Their findings showed the hottest spots in town.
I've been the uptown, and the other kind of hot spots are really along the light rail corridors. Kind of getting down into South End, there's a lot less vegetation, or I'll say younger vegetation.
That's part of the reason why trees matter, because unlike buildings and pavement, they don't bounce that heat back into the air.
They're not reflecting the sun's rays in the same way. They're actually absorbing that for us and doing a lot of work to combat that.
But not all neighborhoods in Charlotte have equal access to that protection. Underserved communities often have far less tree canopy than more affluent neighborhoods. Near Freedom Park, for example, mature oak trees line the streets and shield homes from the heat.
Those were planted a long time ago, and so they have the benefit of getting to an age where they provide a lot of benefits to that community. That didn't necessarily happen in all areas of Charlotte, in those like west, north, and in east neighborhoods.
To beat the heat, Riley says your best bet is to head toward nature, especially where trees have been able to grow and thrive. Finding shade just might be a park or a greenway away.
The bigger the trees, the bigger the canopy, the more positive effects that it's going to have in cooling down the environment.
We recently spoke to Dr. Robin Byers, who's the Assistant Director of the Office of Sustainability and Resilience for the City of Charlotte. We talked about how much heat we've been seeing lately in Charlotte and a special project that the city participated in called the Charlotte Heat Mappers. We're going to take you behind the scenes to see exactly what their process is and how they help the city beat the heat, especially this time of year.
Urban heat and what we track is really how our urban landscape and the hardscape will absorb the sunlight. And so instead of sunlight hitting a reflective surface and bouncing back out, if it's not reflective, it gets absorbed in. And so when you think about Charlotte or any urban area, this is affecting most urban areas. When the sunlight comes and hits center city, we have a lot of buildings, we have a lot of roads and sidewalks and different things that absorb that heat. And so cities tend to absorb that heat and just hold it here. So it actually feels hotter in a city than it does outside of the city.
So specifically y'all's project, like how did you guys go about like collecting that data, like getting all the information in that process?
Sure. So we're fortunate with the city. We are one of the first cohort of the Smart Services Coalition. They picked 10 cities to give technical assistance for about a 3-year process. So we're over 2 years in. And one of the things that they did is they have an organization, like 40 different organizations actually that come together for this coalition. And one of them did heat mapping for us. And so we were fortunate that year 2, we got an overall land surface data. It's spatial data, so it's mapped. And essentially, it's a map of where our hotspots are based on land surface temperature. We also have the Charlotte Heat Mappers. They're out of UNC Charlotte. They got a grant from the National Institute of Health, I believe, to do an air temperature study. And so theirs is a smaller area in the city of Charlotte. And they have a wonderful story map that explains that whole process. But they went out and had folks drive through certain streets with air temperature gauges to take the air temperature. And so we put those two together because the surface temperature tells us where it gets the hottest on the ground. And then the air temperature tells you how it actually feels for a resident who's walking in the city. And so both of those together give us a really good understanding of where it's going to be the hottest, where there's a little reprieve from the heat.
What were y'all's like main challenges with collecting all this data with the different kinds of like sides of it?
We're figuring out the best way to use it and the best way to share it right now. So we have a version of the data that looks like a satellite image. And we have a version of the data that is polygons across the city of Charlotte that's very similar to other data that the city of Charlotte shares. And so we're trying to figure out the best way to share that information so that anyone looking at it can actually tell what the data is trying to tell you.
What was y'all's like major findings?
I think the one key thing for us, this data has been able to help us pinpoint exactly where it's hot. And it's not just anecdotal information. I think a lot of us, we can tell where we feel hotter. We know when the air conditioning kicks up in our different vehicles or in our homes. But actually having the data helps us see exactly where we need to focus some of our strategies to accomplish this. The areas that have heavy impervious surface or heavy hardscape obviously are going to absorb more heat. There's less shade. There is a correlation with the tree canopy and urban heat. So where you don't see a lot of trees, that's where we see the heat spikes the most.
Do you guys have any like steps that are like looking forward to like in the next 2 to 5 years?
So we're building a couple things right now. I will say, let me start out by saying that the community has been talking about this and been trying to mobilize themselves for a long time. So this is not something that's new to the city of Charlotte. In terms of new to the city and our community of Charlotte. This is something that now that we have some data, we can put into more use. We also added a climate risk assessment to our strategic energy action plan. And so our update to that plan was just adopted unanimously by City Council in May. That includes this heat risk assessment, which shows that urban heat days have increased 300% since our baseline year, which is between 1960 and 1990. So it's gone from about 6 days to about 20 days, over 95 degrees. That's where the city measures urban heat. So we have that data, we have this land surface data, and we're pulling that together. We're working with the Charlotte Heat Mappers. We're also working with Mecklenburg County to see what can we do for the community. We're pulling that together. We've worked with the state on this idea of having an urban heat action plan. And so we've seen how other communities have worked on these and pulled in what they are doing versus what that they can look to do in the future. And so right now, I think the focus that we're doing is trying to get, again, more of those stories to really understand. So Dr. Catherine Idiorak has a survey out. The Charlotte Heat Mappers just sent out a survey asking, I think, 5 or 6 questions about urban heat and how you experience it as a resident. And then also, we are fortunate through Smart Surfaces Coalition to have a great partnership with the North Carolina Public Health Association. And so one gap that we've noticed that we're working to fill now is how can we better relate urban heat, greenhouse gas emission reductions, and public health? I think the and public health, we've talked about how it affects public health. Every time there's a warning that comes out, we're like the elderly, the youth, pregnant women, anyone who has a respiratory illness, please be mindful of high heat days. And that's where it stops. And so we're working with North Carolina Public Health Association and then Clean Air NC and NCPHA are actually putting together heat mitigation focus groups. But a lot of that is to connect the medical community with residents. So how is urban heat affecting health? How is it affecting health from a resident perspective? How are the doctors, nurses, and different folks in our medical community, how are they seeing health impacting their communities and their patients? And what kind of connections can we make?
In another piece of weather-related news, North Carolina is suing FEMA over the cancellation of flood mitigation projects, especially just on the heels of Chantal and many folks across the state being impacted by heavy rain that led to flash flooding. Our Nick Sturdivant spoke to North Carolina Attorney General Jeff Jackson about the new lawsuit.
Carolina Attorney General Jeff Jackson filed a lawsuit against FEMA for canceling a federal program. It's called Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities, also known as BRIC, that allocated over $200 million to protect the state's infrastructure. The cancellation, according to Attorney General Jeff Jackson's office, affects critical infrastructure projects, including water and sewer services, which have been damaged by storms. I want to bring in live on the show Attorney General Jeff Jackson. Attorney General Jackson, thank you for your time this afternoon.
Good to see you.
Can you talk about the long-term impact that this will have on residents here in North Carolina?
Sure. Here's the issue. This program, which was President Trump in his first term, is designed to protect our infrastructure against floods. And we're prone to those in North Carolina, as folks have recently seen. So a lot of this is about taking some critical infrastructure like pump stations, sewer lines, and moving them up above the floodplains. We have over 60 of these projects in North Carolina for which funding was designated. It's over $200 million, as you said, to the state, which is a whole lot of money. So we have filed suit, and we think we have a very strong legal case.
Does this have any impact? And I'm thinking of, because we're approaching a year since Helene hit Western North Carolina. Does this have any impact on the recovery efforts there? And also, I'm thinking about the recent flooding in Central North Carolina. Will this cut in the program have any impact on those recovery efforts?
It's not going to affect recovery. It is going to affect the next flood. Specifically, you mentioned the flooding we had in the central part of the state recently. In Hillsborough, they had a few days where they couldn't treat their wastewater because the pump station there was flooded. Well, that pump station is on the list of projects that have been designated to receive funding, basically to move it above and out of the flood zone. We just know now in North Carolina which pieces of critical infrastructure are most vulnerable when there's a flood. We had our list. We gave it to this program, FEMA's program. They designated these places as being worthy of receiving funds, and now they've pulled the rug out.
So what happens in the meantime? As this plays out with the lawsuit, how does the state plan to fill the gap with this program now being cut?
Well, you're right. The lawsuit will take a while to resolve, but our specific request in this lawsuit is that the court treat this as an emergency, particularly because, we are entering, we are actually in the middle of hurricane season right now, but other municipalities have already put money into a lot of these projects in reliance of FEMA doing their end as they have pledged to do. So our lawsuit requests the court to treat this as an emergency, put an injunction in place, and basically tell FEMA, hey, while this lawsuit is pending, you cannot pull the rug out and take these funds away.
Have you heard from the Trump administration or any of the other AGs on this lawsuit? Have they heard from the Trump administration? And have they given a specific reason on why they are canceling this program?
No, we have not. However, this was Trump's program that he created, and we have a statement from Senator Tillis and from Representative Chuck Edwards asking FEMA to reconsider cancellation here. So this is a totally bipartisan effort as far as I'm concerned. And the impact of it, if we don't fix it, will be completely bipartisan because it's going to be felt across communities all across the state.
Attorney General Jeff Jackson, thank you for your time. You've been so generous with your time. Thank you again for joining us here on Live Impact News.
Thank you. Take care.
And again, you guys, that is Attorney General Jeff Jackson there, giving us his response after, again, we got the information about the lawsuit impacting that, regarding that federal program that would impact infrastructure here in North Carolina. And again, so James pointed this out, and I want to make sure I point this out as well. Scrolling down, as far as impacts, those local projects, those key projects here that will lose funding from the BRIC program. So in Salisbury, and James, chime in just to give some more context if you can. So in Salisbury, $22.5 million to relocate a flood-prone pump station on the Yadkin River, with the city having already invested $3 million locally. And so
that's right. Yeah, we have those numbers on the screen right there. And as you just heard from the Attorney General, some of these local jurisdictions had already invested money into some of these projects. So I think in their news release, Nick, as you cited, this was one of them. And so this is actually the whole list that they sent out. We put them on a little bit of an easier to read graphic, but you can see how many.
It's a lot. Just to show you how many.
Citing,
and also Gastonia, $5.9 million to restore creek banks and move sewer lines to prevent flood damage. And again, a lot of this, I know I asked about current recovery efforts, but a lot of this is preventative things for the next storm, as Attorney General Jeff Jackson weighed in. For a lot of folks, that next storm was Tropical Depression Chantal, as it hit central North Carolina. And we showed you those images in that video from the flooding in Durham County, Orange County, and so on there, in even Alamance County, which is close to my
I know you just
hometown.
talked to the State Attorney General about this, Nick, but if I punch that list back up on the screen, Hillsborough, which we know was hit hard by Chantal and a lot of the recent floodings, was awarded $5.8 million, according to the Attorney General's office, for the river pumping station. And so that is probably one of those key projects that we're seeing kind of in live time, Nick, where these projects are meant to mitigate or build resilience against floods, whether they be from tropical storms or just these training thunderstorms that we know that community has been seeing.
We'll continue to track rain, storms, and heat right here on Live Weather Impact. I'm meteorologist Brittany Van Voorhees.